Hi ho, hi ho. It's off to work, AI agents go. You're watching Techstrong, gang. Hey everyone, happy Monday. Wow. Happy Monday. Let me say that again. Hey everyone, happy Monday. Where did the weekend go? I'm Alan Shimel. You're watching Techstrong, gang. We've got a lot to go over with you today. As usual, it's a big fat dose of AI and some data centers thrown in. But we'll be talking about, API security and whatever else pops up into our panel of gang members' minds today. Let me introduce you to our gang members. I'm really happy to have the two Jacks. It sounds like a movie but it's not Jack Nicholson. It's Jack Poller, Jack P.
Yep.
If you could say hello so we know hello. Jack P. And then we have Jack G, Jack Gold. Jack, you there?
I'm here.
All right. So we'll try to remember the G's and the P's, but if you both answer to a question, we understand. Joining the pair of Jacks, we've got a full house. See what I did there? Robert Reeves is with us, and from Colorado, fighting the bandwidth wars, our good friend Camberley Bates. Hey, Camberley, how are you?
I'm doing good if the bandwidth would cooperate.
Well, luckily, our state-of-the-art recording system records you locally. It was a lot of money sending a camera crew out there, but we're recording you locally, and it should all work fine. Guys, let's jump into this wonderful Monday morning topic. Our first topic is around the API economy finally gets real. Just in time to turn out the lights on the way out. Well, that's my opinion. Robert, you may have a different opinion. What are we talking about here?
Well, we're talking about, how we integrate and interact with systems. Do we, as humans, go to a web browser, we're using a terminal, command line, something where we're stitching together code to get systems to talk to each other. And as we know from our friends in Cloud Native Computing Foundation, CNCF, that APIs are the way to go. That's the better way, superior way for systems to communicate. And what we're talking about here in an API economy is people delivering their systems via an API and, alongside our GitHub Actions or the web interface or scripting or something like that, a Python module. So when we start building systems that are API first, they communicate with each other a lot easier. And of course, this gives rise to the ability for AI agents to do a lot of that work for us. And so that's what we're starting to see. We're starting to see as more and more large enterprises and individuals use agents, we're starting to see more consumption from companies that deliver their services via an API for those agents. And that's a good thing for certainly AI, and it's a good thing for those companies that are delivering services via the API.
We're also seeing something interesting, if I may jump in here. Some companies that were closed off before are now opening up via API to generate revenue. And a good example of this is the telco industry. T-Mobile, AT&T, Verizon, they all had their own networks, they all had their internal cores. And what they've done now is come together with Ericsson driving this, formed a new organization called Aduna that is actually providing API connectivity to the carriers. And the carriers are actually able to generate revenue on that. So for instance, you're logging into your financial organization and they want to make sure it's really you. There's an API that they can address with the carrier network for your mobile phone to make sure it's really you, that you're in your location, it's your phone, you have the right identity, etc. and they're actually able to charge, perhaps pennies, but there are billions of these transactions going on. So there's real money to be had. So the API economy is actually turning into a revenue-based economy for a lot of companies that were closed before, but now find a way to generate real cash.
Absolutely. Guys, I got to tell you something. 2015 or so, maybe it was 2016. I'm in Las Vegas at a conference called CA World. Camberley, I'm sure you probably, right? Robert, we've all been there.
Dude, I think I was there with you.
You might have been. Actually, you might have been. Now that I'm thinking about it, Robert, I'm almost positive. You were probably in one of your Big Lebowski sweaters, remember?
No doubt.
And you were there. But they announced something called the API economy, that in the future, applications were going to talk to each other via API, and API gateways, and APIs were the way it was going to go. It was going to drive the whole economy. Now, 2-3 years ago, I remember talking to the folks at Akamai about their network report, right? Akamai carries a good percentage of the entire network, of the entire internet flows through Akamai CDN and so forth. And Cloudflare as well. A majority of the traffic on the internet today is actually APIs talking to APIs. It's a lot of web-to-web stuff, but it's APIs. So I would posit that the API economy has been alive and well a long time, but now we're starting to see people quantify the revenue associated with it. However, there was a time when I first heard about agentic AI that I thought it was just a fancy term for API, right? But APIs generally don't do autonomous tasks where agents can. So my question to the gang is agentic AI spurring this realization of how real the API economy is? Does it eventually replace your APIs? Because APIs are rather dumb. It's like having a plug in the wall and you got an electric cord that you plug into it. That's basically what it is, right? And the current's the same. So is agentic AI spurring on the use of APIs, or is agentic AI, with A to A and MCP eventually going to replace APIs? I think that's the question.
I don't think it's an either or. I think it's a both. There's a lot of things for which we really don't need an AI agent or AI in general. There's
Heresy,
a lot
Jack
of
P. Heresy. Blasphemy.
heresy, yes, blasphemy. But I mean, I think the API economy has been around for a while. It's just hidden and not talked about. For instance, there's a lot of email that gets delivered by API that is done in the background, either bulk email or text messages. So for instance, all of your two-factor authentication, when you log into some website and it says, I'm going to, it has your cell phone number and it's going to text you a code, that gets driven through an API through either somebody who can hit the telco and generate a text message. And that's all, again, as Jack said, those are all microtransactions in terms of dollar value. There's fractions of a cent per, but it adds up because it's bulk volume. And there's a lot of companies whose entire business model is based on that. SendGrid for API, for email is one, right? And you don't need an AI agent to be able to send an SMS text for two-factor authentication. You really don't.
I would think that given the technology that the API is more efficient from an energy and server consumption than an agentic. So there's a trade-off there when you say how you're going to do this. I mean, in terms of, I know later on we'll talk about this, but the amount of energy that has to be consumed to produce that same result, why would I change if it's extra effort?
Yeah, interesting. And Camberley, I agree with you. And Alan, to your point earlier, all of these APIs traveling around using a bandwidth. Imagine what's going to happen when you have AI agents sending AI agents other information. We're not talking about bits and bytes here anymore. We're talking about gigabytes. And it gets really messy very, very quickly. So one of the reasons they came up with MCP and HAA and all of that is they're trying to get their hands wrapped around that right now, and it's not really working all that well. First of all, they're very new protocols, so we don't even know how well they're going to work. But it could get really messy with agentic AI from a data transmission perspective.
Well, I think it was a long time ago when, I can remember Microsoft coming out with another operating system that would take advantage of, more than a couple megabytes. And we said, how in the world are we going to use it all?
Oh, I'll use it.
Look, it's the nature of computing for as long as I've been involved. I remember one time I bought, it was a hard box. It was like, it was about that big, right? It was an external hard drive box that you can plug into your x86 machine. And I want to say it had 40 megs or 30 megs.
Yeah.
And I said, my God, how am I ever going to fill this? Is going to last me forever. Like, I couldn't believe how much.
Do you still use it?
Pretty much. Yeah. I got it plugged in over here, along with the drives. Remember, what's that noise, that grinding noise? Oh, it's my hard drive. They used to make noise.
What's a hard drive, Alan?
Yeah.
What's a hard drive?
Who's making daiquiris? Why do I?
It's funny. I was actually going through one of the junk drawers on our third floor. So we have a third floor office in my house, in our townhouse. And we use it just as an office, a spare bedroom. And I have all my techie junk drawers in there with, serial port cables and like all the stuff we used to use. And I came across an external DVD drive. And at first I was like, what is that? And then I picked up, I said, oh yeah. I said, I wonder if it works, but I don't have a DVD to test it with. So anyway, maybe I don't think APIs will go that way, but.
Well, that's it's not. We've been saying, on the techie side of the house, we've been saying for years, oh, hey, we need to design API first architecture, even internally. And it's like pulling teeth, getting business leaders to understand that, like, okay, let's take this old busted system, J2EE 3-tier app, and come on, let's at least do an API wrapper on it. And the business side of the house was saying, no, we can't afford that. It's fine the way it is. Well, I'm happy to see that revenue is driving the change, even though the geeks and the nerds were saying API first. And yes, we've gotten there. And there's certainly examples of companies doing that and winning. I love Twilio's API, and I believe they were one of the first to say, we're API first. That's how you interact with us. But it takes something like, this revenue increase for companies to say, maybe it is the right thing to do. And Jack G, you were talking about that with telcos. It's not because the telco said, well, this is a better design pattern. They said, nah, this is where the money is.
Right.
And I think that highlights just the value of when you want to make change in an organization, you have to get both sides aligned. You have to get your techies aligned with the concept of technology, next step in technology advancement with next step in advancing the revenue for the company. You got to align both of those if you want to make a change. Even though as CTO, me calling for API first, I need to also have the business side of it to convince my leaders, my peers, that it's a good thing and worth the investment.
One of the challenges with APIs, though, is that there's so many of them. There's no standards for APIs. And what you really end up talking about or end up with is gazillions of APIs that often people can't use because they're not really well defined. And so I've seen companies that had built APIs that sort of build a spec around it, And then when people try to go to use it, doesn't work. They can't get to it. So it's not simply about creating an API. It's about creating one that people could actually use.
Well,
Absolutely.
back to what Robert was saying is that whenever you're creating anything from a business aspect, you've got to tie it to a return on investment. What's the value in doing this other than saying create an API? So it's like any other feature or functionality that we have in a technology it has to have a purpose.
Yeah. Let me give you my litmus test for how real or not it is. I think maybe 4 or 5 years ago, one of the hottest sectors in the cyberspace was API security. Jack P, you probably remember, right? You had no name security. You had one that Red Hat bought that I don't remember. You had traceable AI.
Traceable. There's a lot. There were a lot of players.
There
in
were
the
a lot.
space, and
This
it
was
still
a
is
big
an
thing
issue.
because people didn't even realize how many APIs they had that were talking to each other. It was such a majority of the traffic, and everyone was talking API security, API security, API security. And as often happens in these, new product, the product becomes a feature of someone else's platform, and the first 3 companies who get out make a good amount of money, and everyone else is chasing scraps. You don't hear API security much anymore, do you? I don't hear it, Jack P. Do you?
No, I think it's been subsumed into application security as a
whole.
broader topic.
Yep.
It is a feature set of how do you protect your application in general. And I think the challenge, going back to sort of the revenue side of it, the real challenge for people hasn't been securing the API. It's been much more how do we account for it and do the accounting and the make sure we can collect the appropriate revenue for the API.
Like Camberley was saying, ROI.
It is.
it.
ROI
It is.
for the
Economics.
API. All right. Hey,
Right.
we gotta move on. Let's take a break, and we are going to come back to Hi Ho, a little Snow White and the Dwarfs. Hi ho, it's off to work we go for AI agents anyway. You're watching Techstrong, gang.
You've earned it. The spotlight, the responsibility, the weight of teams, companies, and entire industries fall on your shoulders. Lives depend on your decisions, your home life included. At work, you're protected, physically and digitally. Nothing gets through your team without a fight. But in a globally connected world, everyone sees you, including those who mean to cause you and your organization harm. And now home, your sanctuary. Attackers see an opportunity. Your digital front door is wide open. And what compromises your home can breach your boardroom. Because the devil's greatest trick isn't targeting your workplace firewall. It's convincing you that your personal life isn't at risk. Black Cloak. Digital executive protection, defending the new attack surface. Your personal life.
Hi, everyone. We're back here on the gang. And as I mentioned before the break, we got a story or a topic we want to cover now about, everyone's expanding their AI agent workforce and rolling out more AI agent functionality. Or a lot of people are saying, great, show me where it's actually working. But Jack Gold, what do you think about this one?
Yeah, there's a lot of experimentation going on with AI and agentic AI in particular, because people think that it's going to solve a whole bunch of problems for them. The real challenge with it, well, there's multiple challenges. The first challenge is, how do I define the problem I'm trying to solve? And companies aren't necessarily good at that. Second challenge is, if I'm using agentic AI versus a human, is the process really the same? Can I just clone the process from people to technology? And often the case is that's not the case. You can't just do that. The third problem is that it's really hard to build agents. There's a lot of stuff that goes on, from modeling to understanding the security, orchestration. You need to be able to access, and this is probably one of the hardest parts, you need to really be able to access all the data within your organization that will feed that agent so that agent knows what they're doing and can do it accurately. And so what's ended up happening is that the early stage agents were built by companies putting together a toolkit. They get, one from column A, one from column B, one from column C, put it together and try to get an agent that actually works and is producible and can be put into production effectively. What we're seeing is that the big hyperscalers, the cloud providers, are trying to do that, are trying to make that a much easier process. And so this week, as an example, Google introduced its Gemini Enterprise product set. And what it really does is it puts a wrapper around, first of all, its Gemini model, but also includes a series of access points for people who want to build agents, which includes the orchestration capability, the ability to add information or search for and add information. We just talked about APIs, the ability to find the APIs within your organization so they can bring in the appropriate data so that these agents are working. The third piece of it is that it's also got to be able to run effectively with your other apps. So in Google's case, they're trying to tie it closely to their Google Workspace application, which is their Office equivalents. And so what we're seeing is that companies are now looking at this from the perspective of, can I find a whole bucket worth of tools in one place, well integrated, so that I can make these agents work? And by the way, the bigger problem for a lot of companies is that they've used or they built these agents through IT, through DevOps. The problem with that approach is that DevOps is resource restricted in most organizations, and line of business users really want to take some of these agents and at least modify them, if not create them completely on their own. They also want to be able to exchange them. So again, one of the things that Google is offering within their enterprise platform, and by the way, AWS does this as well, Microsoft's moving the same way, is a marketplace. I can throw agents into this marketplace. I can pull them out. I can modify them if I want to. Maybe in the future, it'll be revenue generating. I mean, initially, Google is going to build a bunch of agents that they'll put into this repository that you can then pull out, some for healthcare, some from retail, some from other scientific approaches. And eventually, it's going to be a marketplace, just like Salesforce has their marketplace built around their product set. Microsoft has, everyone has a marketplace these days. So the intent is to say eventually, okay, you need an agent. Somebody's already built it. Don't build your own, or at least don't start from scratch. Here's one that you can pull out of the marketplace and go modify within our toolkit. And so it's really an all-encompassing. By the way, it's also about lock-in. These guys want you to get locked into their approach, of course. They already do that in the cloud anyway, and this is a cloud-based product. One of the things, by the way, it doesn't do yet, none of them do yet, is really be able to distribute the agent load. So as we move to more localized AI capability, for instance, AI PCs, there's stuff that you want to be able to run locally. You don't want to have to send everything into the cloud. And that's a whole different other problem, but they're working on it. But that's something that we're going to see in a future product place. How soon, who knows, but it'll come. So it's a very interesting space for companies to experiment with right now. There are some production systems. The airlines have been using some of them. Some of the scientific community has been using them, but it's not widespread until we get to a point where people can actually track these things and say, yeah, I'm really getting an ROI by using this agent, as opposed to just going out and hiring a bunch of people. We're probably not going to get real widespread adoption.
What I find interesting is, you look at SAP in the case that we've highlighted here. You look at Google, you look at Salesforce, Dreamforce, you look at AWS, you look at Microsoft. every single one of them says, we are agent agnostic. As a matter of fact, we could manage and give you access to everybody's agents. You could use the agent of your choice. But we want you to use our agents, right? Or, we'd like you to use our agents. You should use our agents because they give you this, this, and this. And so, and look, kudos to Microsoft. I don't use it, but Copilot, they built Copilot into everything from GitHub, to Office, to Azure, everything. It's one Copilot. I think Google's following a similar track now.
Well, that's more branding on
But
Copilot.
there's functionality,
Yeah.
right? In other words, they're building an agent, their agent, because the underpinnings of their agents all have common code, right?
Mhm.
Across their offerings. SAP's doing it. Salesforce might have been the first one with Agentforce.
The bigger problem, though, Alan, is not the agent. The bigger problem is the underlying model.
I think there's a higher level story here that's an industry-wide story and a trend story that I think we miss. If y'all remember Web 1.0, Web 2.0, Web 3.0, right? We are really in the same type of revolution, just much, much faster with AI. If you think about it, AI 1.0 was all about the large language model. And I think it's generative, but I think it was pretty clear that Anthropic and OpenAI have sort of won that battle, right? And it's natural language interface, chat-based interface. AI 2.0 is about the agents now, machine to machine or human to machine in a different way. And I think there's two separate battles going on here. One is, what's the development platform? Who defines the development platform for AI agents? And Google is putting a stake in the ground on this part of it. And I think that's what their announcement is about how do you build these things, of course, using Google's tools. The second part of the battle is, what infrastructure does that AI agent run on? Is it running in the Google Cloud, in the Microsoft Cloud, or in the Amazon Cloud? And that's an open battle right now. And Google wants that business, as does Microsoft and everybody else, right? Because they got a gazillion servers that they got to keep occupied for this stuff, right? And I think that when you look at this AI 2.0, Google came out with a very interesting pricing model, which is a per seat user month model for the development platform. Now, Microsoft made an announcement last week or the last 2 weeks about their AI security solution. And within that, they have AI security development capabilities and AI agent for security development capabilities. And when you run those agents, development is free, but when you run them, it's based on processor hours, similar to the way we consume compute. So it's a completely different pricing model going for a completely different customer and use case, but it's both agentic AI.
So Jack, talking about
just a quick clarification. Sorry, Camberley. What's interesting about Google is if you read under the covers, yes, it's a per person per month charge, unless you start using a whole bunch of CPUs in the cloud. In which case they pick up the charge.
I missed that part, but yes, because
They
want that money.
actually all have that, though. That unlimited is not truly unlimited. Kimberly, your point.
Kimberly.
So you guys are talking about the platform delivery coming from a Google or from a Microsoft, but there's a much bigger piece in the agentic piece going on, which is highlighted by the piece that we talked about, SAP. In kind of my belief, there's a lot of these agents will be delivered through the different ERP systems, application systems, whether it's ServiceNow, SAP, Jack Henry, for the financial community or something like that. I mean, there's a zillion of these applications that are out there that if you look at what SAP rolled out, it's how do you use their systems better and improve their systems. So it's not just there's a platform play, true, but that's also, we also have to remember that so much of the enterprise's applications are still on-prem. They're not in the cloud.
Yep.
And so, yeah, that's great and fine and dandy, but where's the rest of these applications going to go? And I think it's it is good. That development's got to happen through not just DevOps, but it's got to happen through the ERP system. And one other comment here, Jack Gold, as you were talking about the DevOps, the ROI piece of it, what this appears to me is this is a product management issue. True product management to define what the business problem is, what are we trying to solve, how are we going to deliver it, and then defining what that is and handing it over to development to start putting it together once you've validated with customer. It's not just tell DevOps or CEO saying, "Get me an agent. I need to be able to talk about it at my next release." No, it's part of an additional feature or functionality coming out of the use cases that we're delivering on.
So a slight modification to that, Camberley, though. I think if you read under the covers what Google's trying to do, what Microsoft's trying to do, what AWS perhaps not as aggressively trying to do, is they're trying to democratize this. They're trying to say, hey, if you can do an Excel spreadsheet, which is a line of business function, you don't send that to DevOps, then you should be able to build an agent. That's what they're trying to get to. Now, are we there yet? Probably not. But that's the ultimate goal, making it a line of business function. You and I build our own agents, or at least modify agents, without having to go to IT, because eventually there are going to be millions of these agents running around, and IT can't handle it.
I think this is also a fight for the soul of your IT department, right? Who is your go-to, right? You want to talk about past winners, losers. Obviously, Microsoft over the last 30 years, 40 years has owned the hearts and minds of most desktop users, of most personal computer users. They've had the greatest developer channel. They, look, hate them or love them, they are who they are, right? AWS, when we talk cloud, a lot of people, it begins and ends at AWS. Apple has their fanboys and everything else. This is the next battleground for who's your go-to, right? For a lot of companies, their ERP solution, their SAP is the heart and soul of their IT. For other companies, it's their Salesforce, right? And all of these companies are vying to be your agent manager. So it's not just their agents, but your agent manager. And I think the winners in that will be the big winners in this Web 3.0, as Jack would call it, right? This next phase of the AI maturity curve.
And one of the things that Google was, of course, pounding their chest about in their announcements about this is, it's all built on Gemini. And I think we're going to very quickly realize that the underlying model is not that important to agentic AI. It's really all of the other stuff that it integrates with and how it works in concert with everything else that becomes the key, and not the model itself.
And being able to grab your own data to personalize whatever model is the underlying model, that's really ultimately going to be the key. If you're Delta Airlines, you don't care what's going on at United or American. You want to be able to pull your own data into that model.
That's what was interesting about the Google announcement, is they explicitly said, we want you to be able to access your data because we understand that's the basis for agentic AI. And they called out explicitly Microsoft 365 as being able to get your data. So they've already conceded essentially that your data lives in Microsoft, not in Google's Office applications, right?
And they said SharePoint as well.
SharePoint, right. Yep. So they know where the data lives.
And they also stress that they're not abandoning Google search. That becomes a key component of this capability, because ultimately you're going to use that search capability within your own organization to find the data that you need to make your model work, or to make your agent.
They've been dangling Google search as the key to making your own organization better for a long time.
Sure.
Hey, Rolling Stones always play Satisfaction.
Yeah,
Okay. You always gotta give them what they came for.
absolutely. All right. Hey, let's take a break here. We'll come back for our C block. We're going to talk data centers, next gen data centers. Aren't they all next gen? You're watching Techstrong, gang.
Discover Techstrong Group, the epicenter of tech innovation. We're your go-to for reaching IT leaders and practitioners worldwide. Our secret? Impactful content that sparks awareness, engagement, and top-quality leads. With us, you'll access editorial websites, streaming videos, virtual events, custom content, analyst research, and more. Join our satisfied clients. Let's revolutionize your tech journey. Contact us today and tell your story to the world in the most powerful way with Techstrong Group.
All right, we're back. All right, Taylor, count us off.
All right, here we go. C block in 3, 2.
Hey, everyone, we're back here on the gang. Last Thursday, I did one of my Shimmy Says short videos on LinkedIn and X, and it's probably available on YouTube now, too. But really, it was the tale of two cities here. One is the city of AI, and one is the rest of the economy. And we live in, and that's where we're living in, right? Over half of the GDP growth in the U.S. is directly attributable to data centers and AI. We are spending as much on AI and data centers as the GDP of Singapore. And AI is generating enough revenue to represent the GDP of Somalia. So there's a big discrepancy. There's a canyon there, right? But
speaking of ROI.
Yeah, speaking of ROI. But nevertheless, it's damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead. We're building data centers, baby. Data center, baby, data center. Camberley, what's going on?
Well, there has been a bit of reporting about the next generation of data centers being underwater, although we've talked about this for decades now, about the underwater kind of stuff. I think we're going to go back to Atlantis or whatever we want to do. Or putting it on the moon, or putting it in orbit, or whatever, maybe it's, feral doesn't even exist or something. It's in our imagination. But there's been a bunch of people that have been experimenting with these areas, like Microsoft. There's a firm in China that is primarily a firm that has dealt with the floating flotilla out there, all the navies or the seagoing faring, and they're working on looking at putting data centers in underneath the water. But so far, I think what Microsoft said the last time is probably 10 to 20 years from now. So I think we're still like in the middle of what we have here today if we're going to get AI, because in 10 years, I wouldn't say the game's over. We would have gone to AI 5.0, and I think, we'd be in like the 7th inning or something like that. So I think while it's really interesting what they're experimenting with, and they're, getting some data back about what's potential, I think that stays in the same line as Elon saying we're going to Mars, because there's a lot of physics to be, fixed, especially on, that the 5G is not going to work. Let's put it that way. And 5G can't even work at my house because right today we're having so much problems with it. But the other piece to me that's really interesting is this energy and what's happening around the energy. It's when you look at, I just recently went through another review on the investments and that kind of stuff, and taking a look at where we were in terms of the energy infrastructure kind of technology and everything else. And that is that alternative part of AI has taken off like crazy, just as much as NVIDIA has. And I've also looked at the atomic side of the house, and the ETFs are in the atomic side. They're a little bit more dynamic, I would say, but that is a market that's quite interesting. And we've got, China's way ahead of us on the atomic energy for the data centers, and we're trying to catch up. We've got approvals in Wyoming and approvals, I believe, in Washington State, but that's kind of where it's going. We've got to focus here and now to deliver what we can, at least in my age. By that time they get into the ocean, I think I'll be dead.
Yeah. Well, they were talking about putting them up above the Arctic Circle, to take advantage of the cold weather. But of course, with climate change, it's not as cold up there, and so you don't hear them going up there too much. But
Let's melt some more ice.
right. But Camberley, you bring up some very interesting points. If you believe the book, The Goal, and then, of course, the Phoenix Project that's been on it, the theory of constraints, one bottleneck leads to another, right? Certainly, we could put up buildings in West Texas, and Abilene, and out that way, and in some of the states that are leading.
And we are, Alan.
Yeah, no,
We
they're
are.
building big data centers. You could
Everywhere.
build big data centers, but you got to power those big data centers. And
Yep. Power and water.
well,
Those are
if
two
you're
things you
using
need.
right, if you're using water to cool, and you have to do some liquid cooling. There's a question of whether you use water or other liquids, but yes, water and power. And so when you look at this, you've got an administration that is making it harder to use renewable energies like solar and wind. So they are forcing you to use nuclear, and I'm all for more nuclear usage, but that's a window, Camberley, to your point about being underwater. When was the last time we brought a new nuclear facility on in this country? Right? You're talking measuring that in years.
Decade.
Decades.
But
So then what are you
What-
left with? Liquid natural gas, heaven
Ding, ding,
forbid,
ding, ding.
coal, and you want to build them in Texas. And Robert, no disrespect, but the last time I checked, Texas wasn't known for their redundant, uber resourceful electric grid.
oh, that's right. That's why they need the power, and they also need access to be able to run generators on LNG. So where is there a ton of LNG? Where is there a ton of renewables? Like, for example, in West Texas, after 9 o'clock, electricity's free. They just say, "Oh, run your dryers."
No, but it's done with solar and wind.
Yeah, but well, don't tell the government here, but yes,
Yes.
it's happening, and because it's cheaper, even with the difference in structure with writing down your investment in hydrocarbons versus solar and wind, you can do it immediately with hydrocarbons. With solar and wind, you have to do it over the lifetime of that investment, the lifetime of the turbine or of the of your solar panel installation. Even with that, it's still turning out to be cheaper, and they're generating an excess of energy. I think you need a combination. You need, your hydrocarbons, you need wind, you need solar, you need hydro, whether that's, a river or waves or whatever. And so, but the easiest one right now is LNG. There's currently a surplus. And if you build it in Texas, like around, Midland, Odessa, Abilene, my Texas accent comes out when I say those cities' names. Sorry. But if you build it there, those providers of LNG are like, oh, well, it's a lot cheaper. We'll just, top off your tank here. And so as we move to underwater,
Wait a minute. I gotta inject here. It's cheaper
Sure.
today because they have an excess. If you start building 3, 4, 5 data centers, there isn't going to be any
Right.
LNG excess. And you're going to start seeing prices, not the data centers, because they'll handle it, but people will start seeing prices
Well,
increase.
you're already seeing it in places like Ohio,
Yeah.
where they're building a lot of
Well,
data centers.
Well, sure. And that such is the way of
The market.
supply demand curves.
Yeah.
Yeah. But people are making these decisions today, right now. And I just know this because, and I get to do the other Texas thing. My daddy's in oil and gas, and he's got a lot of friends and colleagues that, for their ranches and their yards that they run their businesses out of, people want to build data centers there because they have access to LNG. They have mineral rights and they've got water rights, and it's big. And there's a ton of power generation that's going on in South Texas and West Texas. People are building them, and you're right. Jack, it is going to change, but for where it is today, that's where they're going.
So I'll point out that Camberley sent out something earlier to the group about where the new data centers are being built, and the number one state that's getting all of these new data centers is actually Virginia. And my parents live outside of Manassas, where all of these data centers are being built. Now, they're being built there, one, because of the amount of high-speed internet that's available because of the U.S. government, and two, because it's a lot of FedRAMP and U.S. government data going in the data centers, among other things. The downside is they are incredibly noisy. The fan noise to cool them is really obnoxious and loud. The transformer hum is very loud. They take up a tremendous amount of space, and they employ very few people. Right.
Which is why it's a good thing to put it in Texas, because there's nobody there in the middle of in West Texas.
Exactly. You want them out in the middle
absolutely.
of cow country. The cows don't care.
Yeah, but so
I know cows out in
but
West
Muhammad
Texas.
Muhammad can come to the mountain, or the mountain can come to Muhammad. The reason they're going into North Virginia is because you already have a hub. It's already the biggest data center concentration in the world, probably. And you already have, Jack, as you mentioned, the high-speed connections and the infrastructure in place for that. Now look, my youngest son was a TV, Robert, this was a TV sportscaster in Abilene, Texas. I've been out to Abilene, Texas a number of times. Wind turbines as far as the eye could see, right? You're heading into town. But you go and you go look at there's a Stargate project data center complex going up there. I think it's 3 to 5 buildings, 3 to 5 different data centers. We're not talking the 10,000, 20,000 square foot data center that I built or that I operated in the .com days in Tyson's Corner, right? You're talking mega factories. They want to build AI data centers the size of Manhattan in Louisiana.
Yeah. It makes Walmart Superstore look like
a small mom and pop store. You're talking huge facilities that are going to suck, that giant sucking noise you hear. It's the water and power going in to run these things. But here's the other part of my Shimmy Says from last Thursday. Set to the tune of Led Zeppelin, When the Levee Breaks. What are you going to do when the AI bubble breaks? Run. Because make no mistake, I love AI. I'm not saying it's not valuable and it's not revolutionary and it's everything else. So was the internet in 1999. And you know what people were telling me in 1999 and 2000? Don't worry, it's a new paradigm. It's a new normal. It's the new reality. It's the way things are now. It's the same crap I'm hearing today from people who were in high school in 1999.
Remember AOL?
Yes. The Tyson's data center that we operated, we bought from AOL. But in any event, when the .com bubble crashed, all of a sudden the term dark fiber became, everyone knew. Camberley, you know what dark fiber was, right? We all level 3 in these companies out in Colorado and Interlochen, as far as the eye could see. There were storage and bandwidth companies, right? And Interlochen. And it took 10 years for us to use up that dark fiber and to fill out the data centers that were built in the .com era. My belief is it's going to take 10 years or maybe more for us to fill up these monster AI factories that are being built right now and to use the power. Well, it may take 10 years for that power to come online if we're going to go nuclear. But to the power that we're talking about, power generation that we're talking about building in here. If this thing goes south, because after all, it still is Somalia in terms of revenue, that's what we're looking at. And someone's going to get caught holding that bag.
It could be even worse, Alan. I'm suspecting, a lot of people are putting up these buildings assuming that they're going to be able to fill them with data centers.
I disagree with that completely. These people are building based on existing contracts. They are building. You will note that the entire discussion is not based on square footage, but is based on energy units, gigawatts of energy. And in fact, if you notice the
Yes.
last NVIDIA AMD deal reserved AMD processors based on energy, not CPU cycles, right?
I understand.
Right.
I fully understand that.
it's if you have the energy available today, people will put computers there today.
But
Yeah,
Jack,
but
at
Jack,
the end of the
here's
day,
my
if it
point.
don't make money,
Yes,
right?
but
This is-
I understand that. I don't disagree with you, but I'm simply saying that the building boom of data centers is not speculative in nature.
Oh,
in
it
terms of-
absolutely is.
Oh,
Jack,
no.
disagree.
Let me ask you a question. Where is OpenAI getting the $300 billion to build these
Right.
data centers? That's not speculative?
So I
And
think
it's a
what you're-
circular. It's
I
a
think
circular.
Kimberly
It's a
has a point
circular
about that.
circle jerk.
Well,
I,
So there's two sides to this piece, guys. I mean, you're absolutely right on where's the revenue, the real revenue coming from, which is the enterprise. Kind of a goodness that I saw with Dell had a financial analyst day this last week, and it was one of the things that they highlighted was how many new customers they have that are buying AI processors. Now, that could be equivalent to how many people were buying Cisco and all that kind of stuff and Sun back in 1999. So yes, I would agree that that's part of it. But I look at these big data centers, and these are the ones that are going to be driving the tokens and that kind of thing. And then you have the implementation of what's happening in-prem. And that goes back to what we just talked about in the prior block, which was the agentic. And how do I, move that faster to the development of there? Because I think we have seen that there is value proposition in doing what's going on. There is a big value proposition. It's different than where we were in 1999, where we had pets.com and a zillion other companies that were going up on the internet. This is real companies that already make real money and are delivering product, automating their systems internally. This is not this pets.com, whatever, boom. So I think there's a difference here. And I agree with you. We're in for a crash. We are definitely in for some sort of crash that's going to happen, but it's somewhat of a different basis of economy in terms of where this is going.
Yeah, but you got to look at it. You got to look out 2, 3, 4 years, right? And if you look out 3 or 4 years, most of the agents, most of the agentic AI, most of AI, probably 80% of AI is going to be running at a local distributed level, not in these huge cloud-based data centers. It's going to be running on-prem. It's going to be running on your PC.
on the edge.
Yes, it's going to be 80% of, we're estimating 80% of AI workloads in 2 to
But
3
I
years.
think it
will be on
depends. It
inference.
depends how big this is. Camberley, you're right. The companies that are using it now will use it more. But, a lot of the articles I read is the real success of AI isn't going to be on how well Google and Microsoft and Meta do it. It's going to be on these next generation AI companies, the neo clouds, the robotics, the everything else that is good, because what we are spending for, and make no mistake, we're spending $1 trillion or $1.5 trillion on data centers to house this AI boom. It's $1 trillion to $1.5 trillion with a T.
And by the way, Alan, that's just in the U.S.
Yes.
Right? There's a
Well, I
lot of
think $1.5
other-
trillion might be Europe too, but whatever. Let's not quibble over a couple $100 billion. But, to justify that kind of investment, to Camberley's point, what's the ROI?
Right.
What's the ROI? You need, you talk to VCs, they always work on 10x. Right? I need $10 trillion. That means $10 to $15 trillion.
Right.
Right now, I'm at 19 billion in Somalia fighting warlords.
Well, Alan, that's because with the VCs, only one of those 10 companies actually makes it. So they have to do 10x.
Well, that's their model. But that was another point, and I brought it up again in my Shimmy Says last week. Back in the dot-com days, the dot-com bubble was built on VC money and debt. What's fueled a lot of this data center boom is CapEx. CapEx by the Mag 7. These companies were sitting on literally hundreds of billions of dollars. And they are, I assume some of them are keeping dry powder, but they're all in. They're using their reserves because it's a FOMO situation. Microsoft's not going to let Google win out. Google's not going to let AWS win out. Apple's not sure what they're doing, but they know they got to do something.
So there's
right?
an interesting twist on the CapEx story too, which is the recent changes in the tax laws mean that organizations can take 100% of their CapEx against their taxes in year zero. They don't have to depreciate this CapEx, which means you're going to see that part of this is you're seeing a big shift from OpEx and back into CapEx because of this.
Yeah. And, and then don't worry, the middle class will pay their taxes. We'll make up for it.
And by the way, all of these numbers that people are throwing out, the Stargate, 500 billion, $1 trillion over 10 years. Anybody that says, I'm going to spend this amount of money over 10 years, I take with a very, very large grain of salt. No one knows what they're going to be spending 3 years from now, let alone 10 years from now. So
Yes.
Is all of that actually going to be spent? Probably not. We'll go somewhere else. A lot of this this is really fuzzy stuff that we're talking about right now. And
Are you talking about
Alan,
voodoo economics?
No, I wouldn't do that.
Okay.
But yeah,
No, there's no doubt about it. But, Camberley, I think you know it. I know it. I think all of us know it. There's going to be a correction here.
Yeah.
There has to be.
Yeah.
Doesn't make AI bad. Doesn't make AI
Yeah.
not useful. It's just maybe we're out ahead of our skis in what we're pledging and spending.
What was Alan Greenspan's term? Irrational exuberance?
Irrational exuberance.
Yeah.
There's probably a little irrational exuberance set in. But guys, I got to pull the plug on our irrational exuberance to discuss this today because we've got to get on with it. We've got Techstrong TV coming up here. Jack and Jack, pair of Jacks. At least, but you're not one-eye Jacks. We've got a pair of Jacks. Camberley, Robert, thanks for joining us. Thank you for watching. Again, we've got Techstrong TV following this. It's Monday, guys. We got a big week ahead of us. We'll be here every day of it. You'll watch Techstrong, gang. We're out.